Chapter 1. Fire! The smell of burning flesh threatened to make the young Atchaway choke. Screams of terror, grief, and agony filled the air. He was barely 5 summers old, and terrified as he lay huddled where his mother had concealed him, beneath an apparently collapsed pile of hide drying racks. He scarcely dared to breathe as the thunder of hooves, war whoops, and screams continued. The raiders had crept upon them under cover of darkness and set fire to the thatch of every hut in the village. As the villagers fled the flames, the mounted raiders descended upon the village and cut down the men with clubs and axes. They scooped up several of the women and children and threw them across the back of their mounts, holding their struggling bodies in vice-like grips. Atchaway's mother had crawled under the outer wall of their hut and thrust him under the hide-drying racks, toppling them on top of him to conceal his presence when the raiders arrived. She had then fled into the gully behind the village, where they threw their refuse. One of the marauders spotted her and, catching her, had viciously beaten her, leaving her unconscious on the ground, where she died. When the raid was finally over and the first rays of dawn began to light the sky, the survivors crept out of the surrounding gullies and underbrush and began to take stock of what remained. Atchaway had fallen asleep under the pile of hides, and waking began to cry loudly. The pile was roughly pulled off him, and he scrambled out, looking around desperately for his mother. Bodies lay everywhere, their limbs twisted unnaturally, and their heads and faces smashed in and coated in dirt and dried blood. Most of the bodies were male. Wailing women and screaming children were everywhere, and for many hours nothing else was done but gather up the bodies and lay them on piles of brush, gathered for winter fuel, but now serving as a funeral pyre. Finally, some of the remaining men began to sort through what remained of their village, gathering the hides into piles and carrying smashed clay storage vessels to the gully. This time the marauders did not seem to have been after food. Several small children were now without any parents to look after them, and they wandered aimlessly, wailing their misery, until someone took them in. Atchaway became part of a group adopted by Gurney, the village wise woman, and her teenage grandson. There were 5 children in the group, of which Atchaway was the youngest. Life was hard and food was scarce, and the child missed his mother, often crying himself to sleep. Eventually, the day-to-day struggle for survival forced him to get over the loss, and life continued, season to season, marauder raid to marauder raid, till his 16th summer. Life for the young boy had consisted mainly of carrying water to their lodge and to the patch of yellow squash, beans, and corn that the villagers grew. The plainsmen burned and cleared large swathes of land to plant their crops, and Atchaway spent hours weeding the garden and scavenging the surrounding area for firewood to keep the cook fires burning. When he was older, he learned to shoot with bow and arrow and joined the hunting parties when they hunted the herd of deer and antelope that roamed the plains. At night, Gurney told them the creation stories of their people. Yah is the Great Spirit, the creator of all, life and breath and light, she recited. In the creation time, Yah made the worlds, worlds within worlds, and he formed the rivers and the mountains, and he planted the forests, and from the forests all life sprang, all birds and insects, and from the rivers all fish and reptiles. Yah set tree spirits as guardians of the forest, bear spirits as the guardian of the bear, wolf spirits to watch over the wolves, and so on. From the clay of the earth Yah formed man and breathed some of his own spirit into him, making him wiser than the animals. However, the spirit of the mountains, Shotu, was not happy he had been given rock and stone to watch over, so he decided to take over the training of man. But his heart was violent and fiery like the molten rivers that flowed under the earth, and he taught men to be violent and to destroy instead of building. And so he wreaks havoc on the world within worlds. Learn the ways of Yah, do not follow the ways of Shotu. The plainsmen did not wage war, for Yah commanded not to kill, the wise woman taught them. Only take what you need, never kill unless you intend to eat the animal, except to end its suffering when the animal is wounded to death and will not recover. All things die and are consumed by all in the end. It is permitted to eat mkasha plants and animals, because they will, in the end, eat you too. They had learned the meaning of the word. Mkasha means safe, good for food, explained Goni. Some things are not good and will cause sickness and death. Some plants, some animals too. Atchaway lived 16 summers with his people, the Cheewa, years of constant struggle against the elements and nature and marauding tribes. Insects devoured their crops many years, and the people had to struggle to store sufficient supplies to last the winter months. They hunted the roaming herds of deer and dried the excess meats to add to their winter stores. Atchaway's people were farmers and hunters, but they were not the only people. For the plains were hotly contested by marauding tribes of nomads who attacked without warning, murdering the menfolk, raping and slaughtering the women, and taking the children as slaves. These people did not grow crops. They lived by plundering the defenceless tribes who did. If they hunted, they slaughtered many animals simply for their skins, leaving most of the meat to rot or be eaten by wild animals. They did not stay in one place even long enough to preserve the meat. Violent and bloodthirsty, they drank the blood of their victims and offered it to Shotu as a sacrifice. Surprisingly, all of Atchaway's foster brothers also survived, and one by one went through the dreaming and vision time, staying by themselves in a hide hut, fasting and breathing in the aromatic herbs that burned in the tiny fire of coals in the centre. Each of the brothers had a strong guardian, either a bear or a wolf or an elk, and they were proud to inform the rest of the family group. When it came time for Atchaway to go through the ritual, he was humiliated when on his third day in the tent a grey squirrel had climbed under the hides and sprung upon his head. He had jumped to his feet and hastily exited the tent, screaming in terror and flailing his arms to detach the animal, which appeared to be determined to stay put. The elders of the village decided the grey squirrel was Atchaway's guardian, and began to mock him for its weakness, saying he would never make a farmer, and no woman would want him for a mate. Angry and humiliated by their interpretation of his destiny, Atchaway had taken nothing but his knife and his determination to find and kill that squirrel, and set out to follow its tracks away from the village. He followed the trail for many paces till it vanished in a tumble of rocks where the land began to rise from the plains towards the mountains. Frustrated, he looked back towards the village, but shame and fear of their taunts overwhelmed him, and turning his face towards the slopes beyond which rose a massive mountain range, he did not look back. It was the season of shortening days, and the bushes, plants, and trees of the foothills were in full fruit. So Atchaway picked and ate what he gathered as he passed by. He began to wonder why his people did not forage for food in the forest. It was a lot easier than working the garden, and the fruit was delicious. It was easy walking. The densely forested land rose gently for several miles before the foothills began. Atchaway kept on. The silhouette of the mountains beyond compelled him to continue, till the shadows lengthened and darkness descended. He climbed a large tree, settling himself in a hollow about 2 feet length across, and slept the night, waking at the first rays of sunlight that breasted the horizon. He swung himself to the ground and set his sights once more on the mountain range. He was in no hurry. He came upon a stream flowing down the mountain and decided to follow it. The trees of the forest crowded the bank, but Atchaway continued onwards, ever upwards towards the base of the mountain. After a few hours' travel, he came to a spot where the stream flowed through a wide, sandy area many paces across, with deepening banks on either side. As he looked up what he now took to be a riverbed, he saw that the banks continued to deepen, becoming ravines on either side and forming a canyon. He paused by a shallow pool and saw a fish had been trapped by the dropping water level. He scooped it out of the water and dispatched it with his knife, then scraped the scales off and gutted it. He set about building a fire with dried pieces of driftwood that lay along the bank, carried here from further up when the waters were higher and flowed more swiftly than now. He took a flint out of his waistband and soon had a fire crackling on the dry sand. He set the fish aside and waited till the fire was just coals before laying a flat stone in the embers. Atchaway's people heated stones in this manner, then dropped them into animal skins full of vegetables and meat, which the stones then cooked. Many stones had to be heated and added to a skin to cook the food within, and Atchaway decided that a single stone might cook a single fish if heated in a like manner. When the stone was hot, Atchaway laid the fish upon it, scraped more coals over the top with a flat piece of shale, and watched the steam escape as it cooked. He didn't leave it in long, a couple of minutes at best, before scraping the coals off the top of the fish and using the flat shale to push the stone out of the coals. He was pleased with his efforts and a bit impatient to taste the results, which concluded with him burning his fingers on the hot flesh of the fish when he reached for it. It was delicious, and he quickly consumed it. He travelled on, following the course of the river so as not to become totally lost in this vast wilderness. He was lost, had no idea even which direction he was travelling, but it didn't matter. He had no ties. He was young, strong, and determined to carve out a life for himself after the taunts of his people had driven him to his current course. He could always follow the river back when he needed to. He continued to follow the chasm. That is when he spotted the waterfall. High on the side of the mountain, it fell like a silver ribbon gleaming in the morning sunlight. It took him 2 more hours to reach the lake, into which the waters fell.